Rita was a 29-year-old woman living in a small farming community in rural Texas. Known to everyone as the strong woman, she was capable of handling the toughest tasks in the fields, from hauling hay to carrying buckets of milk, and even driving the herd to pasture all by herself. The scents of straw, earth, and sweat clung to her skin, making her feel invincible. Yet beneath this tough exterior, she longed for warmth, for the embrace of someone who would whisper sweet nothings and make her heart race. Her husband, John, was a good man, hard-working and reliable. He was the one her family had trusted to provide her with a safe home. But there was a truth that few knew: John was not passionate. He spent his days at the market, consumed by business worries. When he returned home, he was exhausted, eating quickly before collapsing into bed. In those moments, he felt like a cold shadow, turned away from her, breathing heavily. Rita would often reach out to touch his shoulder, hoping he would turn to her, wrap her in his arms, but more often than not, she received only a sigh or an unconscious gesture that pushed her away. On those long nights, she lay in bed listening to the rain patter against the roof or the distant mooing of cows in the barn. Beside her lay her husband, but the space between them felt larger than the fields outside. She would turn over, the thin fabric of her nightgown brushing against her skin, but the warmth she craved was something John never provided. She thought to herself, "I am young and full of life, yet I feel like a widow in my own home." She knew her body still held the promise of attraction. With her ample curves, a firm waist from hard work, and rounded hips that made her skirts sway with each step, she often caught her reflection in the mirror and marveled. This was a desirable woman. How could she feel so forgotten? The loneliness resided not only in her heart but also in her skin, which ached to be touched. Then there was Manuel, her 70-year-old neighbor, a weathered farmer who had been a widower for many years. The townsfolk regarded him as a quiet, hard-working old man. But when John was away, it was Manuel who came to help in the barn, fetch water, or mend fences. She began to notice that his gaze was different from that of the other men in the area. There was no mockery or lewd comments, just a quiet, lingering look that seemed to rest on her hands as she held the rope or on the damp fabric of her shirt. One day, as she crouched to tie a bucket, her skirt lifted, revealing her sun-kissed leg. She looked up and met his gaze. Embarrassed, she turned away, but her heart raced. From that moment on, she became acutely aware of every gesture he made. When she dragged the milk bucket, he was there, offering a steady hand with a serene look that held something unspoken. When she wiped the sweat from her brow and a few strands of hair fell against her neck, she felt his eyes on her, burning her skin. She questioned herself, "Is this my imagination? Did he truly see her as a woman he desired?" At night, when John was deep in sleep, she would remember that look. Her body felt restless, her heart racing. She buried her face in her pillow, imagining a rough, strong hand resting on her waist. She knew it was wrong, but the more she tried to push it away, the clearer the image became. One particularly windy night, she sat by the window. The thin nightgown clung to her body, the chill prickling her skin. John lay as usual, turned away from her, and she whispered into the darkness, "What I desire most he never gives me." The words fell from her lips like a heavy confession, echoing in the emptiness of the room. Suddenly, she noticed the flicker of a lantern light near the barn. It was Manuel, moving silently, his thin shadow outlined against the wooden structure. She froze, her heart racing. In that moment, she realized that perhaps the emptiness of her marriage could be filled by another man. That night, the sky opened up, unleashing a torrential downpour. Thunder rumbled, and the wind battered the wooden walls, making the doors tremble. She awoke suddenly to the sound of distressed animals coming from the barn. Her heart raced as she thought of the calves trapped outside, shivering in fear beneath the storm. John lay still beside her, sleeping as if nothing could wake him. She gently touched his shoulder. "John, wake up. The barn is in trouble." He merely murmured something and turned away. With a sigh, she quickly threw on a light raincoat and dashed outside. The rain hit her face like icy needles, soaking her hair. She stumbled through the mud toward the barn. A calf was caught in a chain, thrashing in panic. Her slippery, wet hands struggled to untie the knot. Suddenly, a yellow light illuminated her back. She turned to see Manuel, wearing his old hat and a heavy coat soaked from the rain, moving with purpose despite his age. "Rita, let me help," his rough voice called out above the storm's roar. She wanted to say, "You don't have to," but her hands no longer obeyed her. She remained silent, allowing him to kneel beside her. The rain poured relentlessly, each drop a reminder of the chaos swirling within Rita. She watched as Manuel's hands, calloused and strong, deftly untied the knot that had ensnared the frightened calf. His fingers moved with a practiced ease, and she couldn't help but notice the deep lines etched into his weathered skin, each one telling a story of hard work and resilience. As the calf bolted away to safety, Rita felt a wave of relief wash over her, though her heart still raced from the proximity of the moment. The narrow confines of the barn forced them close together, the warmth of Manuel's breath brushing against her cheek, a stark contrast to the biting chill of the storm outside. She felt his gaze on her, a deep, penetrating look that stirred something within her that she couldn't quite name. Flushing, she lowered her eyes, but it wasn't the cold that made her skin burn. Then, his hand brushed against her arm, and a jolt of electricity coursed through her. "You're cold," he murmured, shrugging off his heavy coat and draping it over her shoulders. The fabric smelled of earth and smoke, a scent that was both comforting and foreign. She didn't speak, allowing the weight of the coat to envelop her, feeling a strange sense of safety in its heaviness. Her heart raced, and she thought, "He's just a kind old man helping me. Why do I feel this way?" But her body betrayed her, still tingling from his touch. As she took a step back, her foot slipped on the wet hay, and Manuel's hand shot out to steady her. "Careful, Rita," he said, his voice low and intimate. Those 3 simple words sent a shiver down her spine, igniting a warmth that spread through her. She met his gaze, and for the first time, she didn't look away. Instead, she let his eyes wash over her, as if he could see into her very soul. Suddenly overwhelmed, she stepped outside into the rain, letting the cold water drench her. But even as the storm raged around her, she could still feel the heat of his hand lingering on her skin. That night, lying next to John, who slept soundly, she stared at the ceiling, the sound of the rain pounding above echoing the turmoil inside her. She traced her fingers over the spot where Manuel had touched her, closing her eyes. In that moment, she knew something had shifted within her. After the storm, she hoped the tempest inside her would settle like the rain, but it only grew louder. John remained unchanged, going about his routine with a silence that felt increasingly suffocating. She watched him, wondering when he would notice the growing distance between them, but he always turned away, oblivious. She didn't blame him, yet the weight of their silence was exhausting. Manuel began to appear more frequently, sometimes bringing water, other times helping to mend the broken fence, or simply watching her from a distance as she tended to the cattle. She tried to convince herself it was merely neighborly assistance, but his gaze held a depth that made her heart race. It wasn't the casual glance of an elderly neighbor, it was heavy, as if he were reading every line of her body, and every time their eyes met, her chest tightened. One sweltering afternoon, she dragged a bundle of hay into the barn, the sun streaming through the cracks, dust motes dancing in the golden light. Her shirt clung to her back, outlining her form as she bent to tie a rope. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she found Manuel standing there with a bucket of water. Rita, drink. It's hot out, he said, his voice steady. She reached for the bucket, and when her fingers brushed against his, a spark ignited between them. She gulped down the water, droplets trickling down her chin and soaking her shirt, and she caught him watching intently. Embarrassed, she turned away, but inside, a fire ignited. For the first time, she felt seen, not just as a wife or a farmer, but as a woman. That realization both thrilled and terrified her. Later that night, standing before her foggy mirror, she caught a glimpse of herself, flushed cheeks, loose hair, and a damp shirt clinging to her body. She stared at the reflection of a woman she had hidden for so long, a woman who was desirable. In bed beside John, she tossed and turned, restless. He slept deeply, unaware of her turmoil. She placed her hand on his chest, searching for some connection, but all she felt was indifference. Closing her eyes, she found herself thinking not of him, but of Manuel's gaze. In the days that followed, Manuel's presence grew more pronounced. He helped her carry heavy loads, walked behind her as she guided the cattle, and though he said little, his silence spoke volumes, making her heart race. One day, as she bent down to secure a rope on a cow, her skirt lifted, revealing her sun-kissed leg. She looked up to find Manuel staring, his expression unreadable. She quickly pulled her skirt down, her cheeks burning, but instead of anger, warmth flooded her chest, a thrill that coursed through her like lightning. She wanted to tell him, "Don't look at me like that," but the words caught in her throat. A seed had been planted within her, one that craved his gaze, not shying away from it. Instead, she welcomed it, feeling alive in ways she hadn't in years. The sun dipped low behind the hills, casting a warm, golden hue over the sprawling fields of Nebraska. Rita sat near the fence, the scent of dried hay wafting through the air, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves. Manuel settled a short distance away, the silence between them heavy, filled only by the distant sounds of crickets and the soft chewing of cattle. Yet, in that stillness, the tension was palpable, like the calm before a storm. She could feel his gaze on her back, a weight that made her heart race. She didn't turn to face him. Instead, she bit her lip, her cheeks flushed with heat. Every muscle in her body felt taut, as if she were a bowstring ready to snap. When she finally stood to return to the barn, her legs felt heavy, as if she were leaving behind an unspoken secret. That night, standing before her mirror, the flickering candlelight illuminated the curves of her body beneath the thin fabric of her dress. She traced her fingers over her shoulder, where his hand had rested just days before. A shiver ran down her spine. "I'm not the same," she murmured to herself, a realization settling in. It wasn't the storm or the barn that had changed her, it was the way he looked at her, unlocking a desire she had buried for far too long. The heat of that afternoon had been stifling. The sun blazed down, scorching every stone and making the air thick and heavy. Rita had been out in the field since dawn, sweat trickling down her back, soaking her lightweight dress that clung to her skin. Alone, she guided the cattle back to the barn, the mingled scents of hay, damp earth, and manure filling her nostrils. Suddenly, one of the larger cows jolted, yanking the rope from her grasp. She stumbled, struggling to regain her footing. Just then, Manuel appeared, moving with the confidence of someone who understood the weight of the work. With a swift tug of his calloused hands, he managed to control the animal. Rita lost her balance and was thrown against a pile of hay. Manuel stumbled too, and as he steadied himself, he fell partially onto her, his body pressing her into the soft hay. She could hear her heart pounding in her ears, mingling with the sound of his heavy breathing that brushed against her face. A bead of sweat from his graying hair dripped onto her neck, warm as fire. "It's okay, Rita," he murmured, his voice low and rough. She felt too stunned to respond, his hand still resting on her shoulder, firm and warm, and she realized she didn't want him to move it away. The afternoon light filtered through the barn's slats, casting golden dust motes that danced in the air. It was then that she became acutely aware of her damp dress, clinging to her body, revealing the fuller contours of her chest. Each labored breath made her breasts rise and fall beneath the thin fabric, so close to him that she could almost feel the heat radiating from his skin. Manuel's gaze slowly traveled down her body, and she trembled under the weight of his stare. She glanced at him, then quickly looked away, but it was too late. She knew he had seen. He attempted to pull back, to stand, but an inexplicable impulse surged within her, and she grasped his wrist. In that moment, the barn faded away, the smell of cattle and the sounds of the farm vanished, leaving only the burning space between them. His lips brushed against her cheek, feather-light, as if seeking permission. She didn't pull away. Instead, she closed her eyes, feeling the air grow thin. His next kiss landed on her mouth, rough yet gentle. Her tongue quivered as it met the salty taste of sweat, the raw flavor of the barn. Her entire body melted, as if she had released a weight she had carried for years. His hand slid down her arm, grazing her waist, the damp fabric of her dress creaking against her warm skin. Where he touched, her flesh ignited. She trembled but leaned closer, her hardened breasts pressing against him. The contrast between their bodies, his aging yet still strong form awakening a fire within her that she had never known. "Rita," he whispered, almost like a confession. She responded by squeezing his hand, a silent plea. "Don't stop." And then everything broke loose. They embraced tightly, breaths mingling, sweat and the scent of hay intertwining. She heard the rip of fabric somewhere, but it didn't matter. All she knew was that her body was ablaze, every fiber yearning for more. In that instant, she was both fear and ecstasy, fear of guilt, but ecstasy in feeling truly desired for the first time in years. When everything finally quieted, she lay on the hay, panting, her hair tousled, her dress askew, revealing her bare shoulder. Manuel sat beside her, his expression a mix of fear and longing. He didn't say a word. She simply closed her eyes, letting the evening breeze dry the sweat on her skin. She understood then, there was no turning back. The barn, once merely a place of hard labor, had become the site where she lost a part of herself she had always tried to protect. In the days that followed, sleep eluded her. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Manuel's gaze upon her, felt his warm breath, the touch that had left her vulnerable. She knew what had happened was forbidden. She told herself she needed to avoid him, to keep her distance, but her body betrayed her. Every morning, as she stepped out into the fields, she felt the pull of his presence, a magnetic force that drew her closer despite her resolve. In the sweltering heat of a summer afternoon in rural Texas, Rita found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions she had long buried. The sun beat down mercilessly as she led the cows to the creek, the fabric of her faded sundress clinging to her body, revealing the curves she had tried to ignore. Each step felt heavy, not just from the weight of her responsibilities but from the weight of her thoughts. She couldn't shake the memory of Manuel's touch, the way his hands had felt against her skin, igniting a fire within her that she had thought extinguished. As she knelt by the water to splash her face, the cool droplets trickled down her neck, sending shivers through her. When she lifted her head, she froze. There was Manuel, standing just a few feet away, holding a bucket. "Rita, let me help you," he said, his voice low and familiar, laced with a warmth that both comforted and terrified her. Rita quickly turned, attempting to hide her dampened dress, but she could feel his gaze lingering on her. It wasn't just concern she saw in his eyes, it was something deeper, something raw and primal that made her heart race. I can manage," she stammered, pulling the rope of the cows tighter, trying to escape the magnetic pull between them. Rita, don't run away from me, he whispered, his words slicing through the air like a sharp knife. She wanted to scream, to tell him to stop, but her voice betrayed her, trembling into silence. He stepped closer, his rough hand wrapping around her wrist, igniting a familiar warmth that spread through her body. For a moment, she struggled against him, but the fight left her as quickly as it had come. She fell into his embrace, surrendering to the whirlwind of emotions that engulfed her. The scent of sweat, earth, and grass surrounded them as he pulled her closer, their bodies pressing together, her heart pounding against his chest. "Manuel, we can't do this," she murmured, but her voice was weak, lacking conviction. He silenced her with a kiss, fierce and demanding, and all her defenses crumbled. The midday sun bathed them in golden light, illuminating the moment as if the world had paused just for them. As they lost themselves in each other, the boundaries of right and wrong blurred. Rita felt alive, no longer just a forgotten wife or a weary farmer. She was vibrant, hungry for the connection she had been denied for so long. They surrendered to the shadows of the creek, their breaths mingling with the sound of rushing water, the rustle of leaves hiding their secret. When it was over, she lay back on the grass, her hair damp and tousled, her lips still tingling from his kiss. Manuel sat beside her, his eyes still burning with desire, but she couldn't meet his gaze. Instead, she wrapped her arms around herself, trying to contain the chaos within. Half of her was terrified, the other half intoxicated by the thrill of what had just happened. She knew that from this moment on, there would be no turning back. The thirst that had been awakened within her would never be quenched again. As she returned home, her legs shaky and her heart racing, she found João sitting in the old wooden chair, sharpening the blade of his scythe. He looked up and smiled faintly. "You're back?" "Tired?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. Rita bit her lip and nodded, her silence heavy with unspoken words. There was no suspicion in his eyes, no questions about where she had been or what she had done. His indifference cut deeper than any accusation could have. She wished he would confront her, demand to know the truth, but instead, he returned to his work, leaving a void that pressed down on her chest. That night, as she lay beside him, it felt as if they inhabited separate worlds. His body was there, but emotionally, he was miles away. She reached out to touch his back, but he merely turned, pulling the blanket up to his shoulder. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks, soaking the pillow. In the darkness, Manuel's face filled her mind, his intense gaze, strong arms, and the way he had made her feel alive. It wasn't coldness she felt, it was hunger, an insatiable craving that she could no longer ignore. She knew she was teetering on the edge of an abyss, but she no longer wanted to turn back. In the days that followed, Manuel became bolder. No longer content to watch from a distance, he sought her out whenever João was away. He brought firewood, asked about the cows, and offered help, but his eyes betrayed him, revealing a hunger that matched her own. One afternoon, while she was cutting grass in the yard, her worn dress clinging to her damp skin, he entered without hesitation, dropping the wood and stepping closer before she could retreat. "Rita," he said, his voice low and inviting, as he reached for her. She felt the heat radiating from him, and her heart raced. The world around them faded, leaving only the two of them in that moment, suspended in time. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the backyard of Rita's modest home in rural Texas. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and the distant sound of cattle lowing. Manuel stood close, his hand gripping her waist firmly, his breath warm against her ear. "Rita, I can't take this anymore," he murmured, his voice rough with longing. She trembled, her lips quivering as she whispered, "Manuel, stop. Someone might see us." But his arm pulled her closer, enveloping her in a heat that felt both intoxicating and suffocating. She pushed against him lightly, a fragile attempt to resist, but that only fueled his desire further. He kissed her with an urgency that ignited a fire within her. For a moment, she struggled, but then surrendered, her hands finding their way to his shoulders, losing herself in the whirlwind of emotions. They were pressed against the weathered wooden fence, the fading light filtering through the leaves, creating patterns of gold and shadow on her skin. She felt consumed, possessed, with no way to escape the intensity of the moment. When their kiss finally broke, she collapsed onto the ground, her dress askew, hair tousled, breathless. Manuel stood above her, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction and a cold possessiveness. "Rita, now you are mine," he said slowly, as if sealing a fate. Dazed, she looked up at him. Part of her was terrified, fully aware that she had given herself completely, but another part trembled with pleasure. For the first time, someone desired her to the brink of madness. That night, lying next to João, her husband, sleep eluded her. He lay peacefully, breathing deeply, while she wrestled with her own turmoil, caught between guilt and insatiable longing. Each time she closed her eyes, she heard Manuel's voice echoing in her mind, "You are mine." Clutching her pillow, she felt both imprisoned and liberated. She knew the price of this possession was steep, and she would have to pay with her entire being. After that day, Rita lived a double life. By day, she walked alongside João, went to the market with him, shared meals under the same roof, pretending to be the devoted wife. At night, when he fell into a heavy sleep, she lay awake, still feeling the earthy scent of another man's sweat on her skin. Her conscience gnawed at her, a constant reminder of her betrayal, as she walked a tightrope that threatened to snap. But the memory of Manuel's embrace, his commanding gaze, and the heat of his breath made her body ache for more. One morning, while folding laundry in the backyard, João approached her, his gaze lingering longer than usual. "You're different, Rita," he said softly, a strange tone in his voice. Her hand shook, and the shirt slipped from her grasp, falling to the ground. She bent to pick it up, trying to mask her unease. "Different? How so?" she asked, her voice faltering. João didn't respond immediately, his eyes filled with doubt. Her heart raced. She forced a smile, murmuring something vague, but deep down, she knew he was starting to notice. From that moment on, João became more observant, following her when she tended to the cattle, returning home earlier from the market. His once indifferent gaze now scrutinized her every move. She felt suffocated, like a thief about to be caught in the act. Meanwhile, Manuel grew bolder, no longer caring about the village gossip. One day, as she carried water from the well, his hand brushed against her waist, his eyes burning with desire. She shivered, torn between the fear of being seen and the rush of pleasure coursing through her. The more she tried to hide her secret, the more it revealed itself. João was not a man of subtlety, but the changes in her were glaring, her restless gaze, her weary body, the telltale marks on her skin that she struggled to conceal. One night, as she closed the window, João suddenly asked, "Rita, do you have something to hide?" She froze. "Me? What could I possibly hide?" She forced a laugh, but her voice trembled. He stared at her for a long moment before turning away in silence. That silence cut deeper than any accusation could. The next day, she found Manuel in the barn. He pulled her close, indifferent to the daylight. She trembled, fear coursing through her. "Are you scared?" he asked, his eyes smoldering. She nodded, whispering, "João is starting to suspect." Manuel chuckled softly, a chilling sound. "Let him suspect. You are my Rita. Once you've tasted this, there's no turning back." Those words pierced her. In his arms, she felt like a trapped bird, terrified yet unwilling to desire freedom. That night, lying next to Joao, she didn't dare touch him. She turned to the wall, tears streaming silently down her face. She knew he sensed the distance between them now, an insurmountable chasm. She recalled the days when she believed a simple home, an honest husband, and a quiet life would suffice. Now, everything lay in ruins. She was an adulteress, torn between guilt and desire, shackled yet ablaze with passion. The secret could not last. Sooner or later, it would come to light, and when it did, she would lose everything: Joao, her home, her name. But what terrified her most was that she no longer belonged to herself. Manuel possessed not just her body, but her very soul. On the last night of this tumultuous chapter, she sat alone on the porch, the cold night wind wrapping around her. She hugged her shoulders tightly and whispered her confession to the stars. The price of this secret is me. She understood now, the weight of her choices pressing down on her like a heavy shroud. Subscribe to the channel,